Okay, so the recording has started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along on this evening in December. You are very dedicated. We really appreciate you coming along tonight. Hopefully you will find this useful. I know that whenever I listen to Janine, I'm always busy taking down notes because she always has loads of great things to say. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kat Calvert and I am the workstream lead in the West Partnership for Wellbeing for Learning, which takes in is very wide and all-encompassing. One of the areas of UNCRC, the areas of supporting learners, and the promise indeed are part of my remit. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Janine. Janine is extremely knowledgeable on all things rights reviews and promises. So hi Nicola, just to let you know we are recording, just in case you want to take your camera off. Janine, I shall pass over to you.
Welcome everyone, and I will just attempt to do the first technical hurdle, which is get the presentation on. So hopefully that's come up for you. And I'm sorry if I end up looking slightly to the side, but it's just so that I can see the chat as well as the presentation. So occasionally I'll look at the presentation. This is a topic that we have been presenting to many people, from ADES to Scottish Government, etc. And it's simply to try and declutter the system for you as practitioners, to say, what does all of this that's happening in the background at national level in terms of policy change, legislation change and priority changes, what does it mean to me in the classroom? So that's what I'm hoping to take you through today, but I don't think it will be too hard on your minds, because this should mean something to you when you think about the young people in your class. So the aims of today basically are to look at the three national priorities, which are children's rights, the reviews around the Morgan Review, and of course the promise. We have drawn 4 common themes to simplify that really cluttered system. And from that, we're going to explore each of those themes in terms of classroom practice. So what it means for you with your young people in your classrooms. Reflect a little bit on current practice, and then for you to start that sort of planning for the immediate and the longer term changes or improvements that you might want to make in your classroom to work towards these themes. Most of which you will already be working on, but hopefully today you'll maybe gain a few more ideas. So this is just a little reminder, okay? We did have in 2020 almost like the perfect storm for educationalists. We had the bill for the incorporation of children's rights was passed in Scottish Parliament. Now, it's not enacted just yet, but it will be, and we all need to be working towards that in the future. We had Angela Morgan produced her review around how we're implementing additional support for learning in Scotland, and she came up with 9 recommendations. And we also had the promise, which was the result of 5,500 lived experiences of children, young people, their families, and practitioners who work with them in terms of how they've experienced GERFIC, essentially, and what they would like to change. So all of those were produced in 2020, and suddenly there was hundreds of recommendations coming at practitioners to say, we want to see this happen, we want to see this happen. We knew that this was too much. So we looked at all of those things, and we looked at the common areas that actually mean something in your classroom. And it was very easy actually to come up with 4. The overarching one really is looking at children's rights, recognizing them and realizing them in practice, and of course participation. So that's not just Article 12 listening, that's about how we meaningfully involve them in participation. Teaching is a relationship-based practice. We need to interact with our youngsters for them to effectively learn from us. So relationships was the second common theme. The third one was wellbeing and care, because our children were with us for 26 to 28 hours a week. We absolutely are part of that scaffolding of care, and we know if they're not well, they don't learn. So, and the last one is really good inclusive practice. and the universal support that makes it that effectively supports our children as well as possible within our class, and then we can target individual youngsters for a little bit of targeting support within the classroom, and then they might need more on top of that. So what does really good inclusive practice, pedagogy, curriculum, and good universal support really look like? So that was our 4 themes. And what I'm saying to everybody, whether you are a director of education, a policy lead in Scottish Government, or a classroom practitioner, if you focus on those 4 themes, you will be working towards the recommendations in the Morgan Review, you will be realising children's rights, and you will be working towards the promises that we've made to care experienced children and young people in Scotland. So I'm now going to go into each of those areas in a little bit of detail and then see what does it mean in practice. Now, I'm going to top load this essentially around rights and participation, because you'll start to see as we work through the themes, if we get them right, they all are interdependent and interconnected with each other. Okay, so if we start to really think about what does realising children's rights in the classroom mean, and in the school and their whole educational experience, we will be working towards really good, healthy relationships with youngsters, which improves behaviour, etc. We will be working towards well-being and the care of our youngsters, and we will be showing really good inclusive practice. So as we go through these, the sections will get shorter because they are so interrelated. So I bring this up. This is a quote from the preamble of the UNCRC. And the reason I bring this one up is because, just to highlight the words in purple, okay, that we want children to grow up in environments of happiness, love, and understanding. Now you can see where this articulates with wellbeing and care and relationships quite easily. So although we're talking about a family environment, our schools are learning communities, and they are part of that family environment. So we would all like to think that they are environments of happiness, love, and understanding. So I just want to bring that human element forward, because we always think in terms of professional standards, but we remember that we're teaching children and young people, and they're little human beings. So this is what we would want this for our own children, and we should want it for all our kids in our classrooms. And I know you know that. And also to point out something that we rarely talk about when we're talking about children's rights, but these aspects of being universal, unconditional, inalienable, inherent, and indivisible. So the fact that every single child has them, they can't lose them. So if they're not responsible, they still can't lose their rights. We want them to be responsible because we want them to recognise other children's rights, but they still can't be given rights or lose them. They're all interconnected to each other. The rights. So sometimes you might think, well, we can do that right, but not that right. They should all apply to youngsters. Okay. So I've said that in a very simplistic way, but we have to be thinking on these lines if we want to recognise children's rights. Now, in the context of your classrooms, we've got quite a lot. We've got 54 rights. But remember, we also think along the lines of well-being, and this is where it articulates with well-being and care. And we would use our scenario indicators to see how well our children are. And you can see that we've already done a mapping exercise of the different articles of children's rights with the scenario indicators, and they articulate absolutely beautifully. Now, I'm going to bring this one up because children's rights become more difficult to realise when children have, if somebody mutes their mic there, so we got a bit of feedback.
I've got it sorted.
Perfect. So children's rights around protection, provision, and participation, that's sort of the 3 key areas that children's rights can be divided into, are more difficult to realise as soon as you get a youngster who has additional support needs. It suddenly becomes more difficult to realise their rights. If they're care experienced, it becomes even more difficult again. Because if you think about some of the rights, like for example, their family has the right to guide them in their life and in their education, but if a child is care experienced, they might not be living with their family. Or their right to privacy and sharing information with them might be more difficult if they're care experienced. So you can start to see as a child becomes more marginalized, realizing their rights becomes more difficult. And that's why we really, really need to think about this. And of course, poverty. Overriding all of that is going to make it a little bit more challenging for groups of youngsters to realize their rights. Okay. So I just wanted to say that these aren't different aspects that you have to be thinking about children's rights. And then you think, but I've got to think about the Shinari indicators and well-being and how does that articulate across the curriculum. They do link very, very naturally. So this is just, I'm going to bring this one up because I said as soon as you have additional support needs with a youngster, it becomes more difficult to realise their rights. In the Morgan Review, the children themselves told us quite clearly what they wanted. Okay, when they've got additional support needs, they want meaningful relationships with staff. They want a school to be a safe place or to have a safe person at school. And that could be you. Your classroom could be that safe space. They don't want their ability to be underestimated. They want us who work with them to have more knowledge and understanding of their additional support needs. Um, they want us to adapt our teaching or our curriculum or our supports within the classroom to meet their needs. The differences across classroom. They want a consistency across staff group. So this is really important that you and your colleagues have some sort of shared understanding about how you approach this. And they want to be involved in decision making. And that's at every level. So even if that comes down to what and how they learn, they want to have an input into that and in that decision making. So what children and young people who've experienced care want from classroom practitioners? And this is what they told us. They want you to be emotionally available to them. So we will all naturally be professionals, but that doesn't mean we don't have a personal side that we can relate to our youngsters. They want us to develop those nurturing and mentoring relationships, and they want us to be ambitious for them. So even if they have additional support needs, still to be ambitious for them. To listen and seek to understand what they're saying through their actions. So this is where all the nurture principles come in. So we see behaviour as a form of communication. And that we try to say, what are the children trying to say to us? What needs are they expressing to us through their behaviour? Seek out professional learning. We will regularly get a new cohort, a new class of youngsters. And I'm saying class, if you're primary, that's your class for the year. But if you're secondary, you've got a whole new cohort of youngsters that come through your doors over the course of a year. And sometimes you'll just get a group of youngsters and you think, I'm not too sure how to work with them. So go and seek the professional learning or the information that you need to support those needs for those youngsters. They quite clearly told us that they want simple, caring language, because sometimes how we write reports or we write the supports down that they see, it's in language that it doesn't mean anything to them or is inaccessible to them. So not overly professionalized, and they can access it, and so can their parents. And be inclusive and prioritize the engagement with learning. So even though their behavior might suggest that they're not interested in the learning, we prioritize it. We show them that that's where we want to get back to first and foremost. We're doing this because we want you to learn, and that engagement with learning. So that's what they've told us they want. So you can start to see where even though that came from the Morgan Review and we want to meet their needs through the Morgan Review, it's starting to already overlap into wellbeing and care, into relationships and into inclusive practice. So what do or could these 4 things look like in your classroom? So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what does realising children's rights look like in your classroom. Now, I've tried to express each of these things into sort of like 4 aspects for you to consider for yourself. So the very first one is your own practice. Okay, does your own practice reflect that you respect children's rights? Okay, that's first thing. So when you're talking, do you show that you know what children's rights are and you know how that you would relate to them? Then the next one is your ethos in your classroom. Does the ethos and the learning environment respect children's rights? So having your expectations on the wall in your classroom, have they been decided on with children? Has there been a participative exercise with that? Now, I know usually have school expectations, but there will be additional expectations that you have within your classroom, depending on your context. So the age of your children, the subject that you're delivering, if you're a secondary practitioner, you may have to have something specific to your classroom. And it also has to articulate with your personality and the young people that you've got in your classroom to make it really real. Are the learners taught explicitly about rights? So, and does the curriculum is it explicitly linked to rights? And I'm going to show you a little video about a school that's trying to do that. And our learners listened to and encouraged to participate in a range of different ways. And we'll talk a wee bit more about what ways could those be. Okay, so that's the four sort of context for you to think about realising rights within your classroom. So the classroom environment, your own practice, what you actually teach, and are you actually involving the youngsters in how and what they learn? Okay, so I pulled out a little example here because there's lots of very, very good practice, well-developed practice happening across Scotland. I didn't have to invent anything. It was quite easy to find. So here's an example from an ELC setting. So I'm trying to use a range of settings where they've looked at this right to be included, Article 23, and how can children actually experience it within the classroom? So things like, if you think about additional support needs, if they're to be included, is there accessible resources? Say, for example, dyslexic-friendly resources, prompt cards for youngsters who have poor working memory, um, physical resources for youngsters who need it, like rulers that have a holder on the top instead of expecting them to put their fingers on it. So are those easily accessible within your classrooms? Those are just a few really, really practical examples of that. Um, Experience, is there fairness and unfairness? Is it explicitly identified within the classroom? Everybody's given the opportunity to take part in activities and experiences. So, and I'm always going to say there, see those youngsters who maybe their behaviour would suggest that they are less able to join into group activities. What do we do to make sure that they still can? Even though we know they're going to be a nightmare with using practical resources around the classroom, you're worried that they're going to get thrown or broken. How do you adapt the practice to make sure that they still can be included and they're not unconsciously sidelined? And how can we give them support to learn and grow as an individual? So it's not just about the actual learning of that class. I'm a maths teacher, so it's not just about them learning algebra or differentiation or division or whatever, but it's how do I get them to grow as a person? How am I supporting their social development? How am I expanding perhaps their general knowledge of the world and how they work with the world? So it gives them this particular example, links it with scenario indicators, and also links it in with policy areas potentially within the school. So it's a really, really good planning document. And you can see over the side where I've got this from, I've got it from the Edinburgh Learning Through Rights in the Early Years document, which you can access yourself if you go online. And don't worry, you don't have to take copious notes because I'll give these as a PDF. Example of weaving. So here's where I would like to show you an example, because I said, are we explicitly linking the curriculum to children's rights? Well, here's just one quick example of a school that's actually trying to do that. Now, I think I need to stop sharing that screen and share a slightly different one. This one here. And I shall just play. Now, hang on one second. I didn't share with sound. So that will be my first problem. So let me stop sharing again and share with sound. Oh, sorry, I've gone to slick. I know this isn't that slick. I've gone to the wrong screen. There we go. Here we go. So hopefully you can see this, and I will stop.
In the classroom, following on from more focused lessons all about children's rights, I would have initially had like maybe a series of lessons we are learning about children's rights and focus on different articles. Taking that forward now, we're looking at each class making links across the curriculum where their lessons that they planned feed into children's rights and make sure that they're making those links explicit. The children's health and well-being, for example, when we're talking about a growth mindset, we could, as part of that, as part of those discussions, talk about children's rights, their right to fulfil their potential, their rights to an education that allows them the chance to express their artistic abilities and all of those things. Just looking for any links to articles throughout. Also, when we're looking at children's health and well-being, last week during Health Week, part of that we had health and well-being lessons about children's mental well-being and their mental health. Being able to discuss that very openly and using children's rights as a kind of basis. You are a child, these are the rights that you should be able to enjoy. If you can't, how can we help you to access these rights, and just bring it into every lesson as much as possible has been really useful.
So in Primary 1 and Primary 2 this year, we have planned a topic, particularly with a rights-based approach. So we took the topic of traditional tales, and when we were planning it, we decided to take one traditional tale each week, and each traditional tale was linked to one of the rights respecting articles. So for example, we took the book The Enormous Turnip, and we linked that to the right to nutritious food. And so every time we looked at a different book, we then talked about through circle time activities and making thinking visible activities, how that linked to the right. And then the children then wrote about that in their writing each week and drew pictures linked to that right. So across the school, we were looking at the issues of plastic not being fantastic in terms of locally and globally. So we looked at the story of the traditional tale, The Three Little Pigs, and we took the theme of plastic, and the children worked with their P7 buddy collaboratively to build a house of plastic using plastic. And we just looked at the amount of plastic that we were actually using. So we were linking obviously cooperative skills alongside technology skills, and also hitting that target of thinking about how we would need to reduce, reuse, but we're also recycling. We then took that further and then looked at good plastic and plastic that you can reuse as opposed to plastic that we all throw out and spin. And across the school, we then took that to a further step forward and looked at how children in their packed lunches can reuse plastic. So rather than bags of crisps in bad plastic, which has to go in the bin, crisps were brought in recyclable tubs, and we had a Plastic-Free Friday, where children were encouraged to come in only using good plastic. And so we're ticking all this reuse, reduce, recycle outcomes that are part of the curriculum. So it allowed us to tease the rights out through something that they were familiar with and then take our learning further into something that was unfamiliar. So we've introduced a new planning framework so that when we are developing our interdisciplinary planning for our term, we think about how the rights are going to impact on that. And not only do we write maybe down the activities that we're going to be doing and the E's and O's that we are meeting, but also the articles that we are actually covering, so that when we are teaching the children, we are able to back up the knowledge that we're imparting with the children with the article that supports that.
So back to stop share and share again. Here we go. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about how one school was actually looking at oh, sorry.
You okay, Janine?
Can somebody
Got you back.
I think have you got me back?
You're back now.
Fantastic. Sorry, it's the only thing with having a video open, a PowerPoint open. Sometimes the internet just goes, nope. So that's how One School was actually embedding children's rights across the curriculum. So no longer just teaching children about their rights, but articulating it into other aspects of learning to say, this is how we potentially respect other people's rights as well. So basically expanding it quite significantly in children's minds. So moving on to participation. Now, again, I'm spent a bit more longer on this particular section because it so massively impacts on the other sections. But participation within the classroom, I mentioned earlier, it's not just about listening to children. It's about children actually playing that key role in actively supporting, say, for example, curriculum making within the classroom. Having that opportunity to influence and participate in decisions about potentially how they learn, are taught and are assessed, and the approaches taken, the topic and the content. And those are just some ways, but another way that I really like to take this forward is learners influencing class expectations. So potentially using restorative circles of some description, and that becoming a familiar part of the lesson, because in a circle, nobody's taking the lead. Absolutely everybody can participate depending on how you do it. And then you can be using the circles for learning as well, checking on prior learning, looking at problem solving if you're about to take a class out, etc. So there's all sorts of benefits for using it, but certainly for developing expectations or if there has been an issue within the classroom. Okay, so that's just a few ways of using participation. Now, I don't want to leave this without telling you why would you do this. Okay, there are an awful lot of benefits that if we can actually use participation within the classroom, it actually really improves the relationship between the learner and the adult that's there. So it might not necessarily be the lead teacher, but it could be support within the classroom. If we are actively listening to youngsters and helping them participate in how they learn and what they learn, it develops this reciprocal trust and respect. It improves well-being because they feel as if they have a little bit of agency and autonomy. And anybody who's in Glasgow and uses the Glasgow Motivation and Wellbeing Profile will know that that agency and autonomy is so linked to well-being. It improves that engagement and empowerment in learning, because if a child has had some choice about what they learn or how they learn it, they're more likely to participate in the activity, and improved achievement and attainment should follow on from that. And I've linked those in with the other three themes. So here you're starting to really see the interconnectedness with these themes. Okay. There are loads of resources out there, so we're not leaving you hanging. I've just shown you a few places. If you go onto the National Improvement Hub, there you can find lots of resources about recognising and realising children's rights. I've just picked out one there, which is the Learner Participation resource, and it's the sort of turquoise resource that you can see on the right-hand side. But you can also be using things like We Higeus, which will give you lots of ideas about how across the school, through health and well-being, through relationships, through community programs, that you can encourage participation. Okay, so there's loads of places for you to go and have a look. So these are the questions I want you to start to think about. Now, in the chat, if I've still got it here, I'm going to put the Jamboard up, just so that we don't pause any learning. If you have access to that link, you can open up, if you have a second screen, you can open up your Jamboard and start to put things in around these questions. So what changes can you make to your classroom environment and the sort of ethos that you try to build up in your classroom to make it more rights respecting? So what do you think you can do? And how can you take account of learners' views when you're planning learning, teaching, and assessment? Because most of us just do that on our own. We have a planning schedule for the year, we know individual kids and we plan their learning, but we don't necessarily all engage in those learning conversations with youngsters to actually say, what would they like to do? Is there somewhere I can offer choice and personalisation for this youngster to get them more engaged in learning? So On the Jamboard, you will find an opportunity to actually put up post-its to say that. But see if you cannot use a Jamboard because you've only got one screen. You can also use, by the way, the scan on your phone or on your iPad if you've got that there to facilitate a second screen. But if you haven't got access to either of those, please just put your responses into the chat and Kat will pick them up and put them on the Jamboard for later. So I'm hoping all of you can multitask. So be thinking about those questions, go into the Jamboard and start to put up a few things, and I can maybe move on because you will start to see how each of these sections and the themes really articulate quite nicely with each other. So if you don't mind, I shall just move on to the next section. And the
Before
next
you
section
move
is
on,
about...
Janine, can I come in just before you move on? I'm going to do a wee quick plug. We have the Young Leaders of Learning programme running across the West Partnership, and just when you're talking about participation there, we are looking to rerun it again, and we're just looking for expressions of interest at the moment to see what numbers would be like. So I do have a wee form for that, and I'll stick it in the chat just in case they see a random form and they're wondering why. And I'll close my mouth now.
No, I highly, highly recommend the Young Leaders of Learning programmes. It's very illuminating when young people come in and do a learning walk around your setting from a different school, and they're not commenting about how teachers teach or anything like that. They're commenting about what their first experience is about walking into your school or walking into your classrooms and talking to other children. And that is where you get how GIRFIC and the lived experience and how learning is experienced by young people. And it's where you can make meaningful change. So I can highly recommend the programme to you. So moving on to relationships. So in this, I'm just going to read the points, the sort of key points about relationships that are relevant to you. Helpful relationships are simply the positive connections between people that foster positive social interactions and establish an environment of trust and support. Now that's what we need if we want youngsters to learn. Relationships form the basis of relational approaches, and that includes teaching. Relationships can build an emotionally safe space for a youngster. So they may not feel safe in the corridor. They may not feel safe in the canteen because it's too big, it's too loud, it's too overcrowded, but they might feel safe in your classroom or with you. Okay? Or with a pupil support assistant or with another group of young learners. Positive relationships promote learning and better behaviour. If a youngster likes you, they will not want to disappoint you and they will want to learn from you. Remember, was it Rita Pearson, who every child needs a champion, and I remember it was a bit blunt, but she said a child won't learn from you if they don't like you. And I don't think it's as straightforward as that, but it certainly helps. Okay, and in a trusting and supportive environment, people can disagree and challenge each other. Now that's life. We don't want to give children this artificial reality that there isn't disagreements, that they can't challenge, they can't have their own. We want our children to become responsible citizens, confident individuals. That's what we want them to do, effective contributors. And we can't do that unless they can express a different opinion or whatnot. And you can only do that within a trusting and supportive environment and those healthy relationships. So I'm going to show you another video, and hopefully the text supports me again to show just how powerful relationships are in school. So let me go to this one and stop sharing there. Kat, I'm sure there's a more efficient way of doing this, but I haven't worked out how. So I'll just come to this one and play.
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay?
I'm tired.
So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today?
The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like, I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on Grady, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity. When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human, let's think about that. Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
So, did you catch all that? Good, 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 good. So back to the presentation, and I think that I couldn't have explained all of that as well as that particular, and I know it's very Americanized, but I know each of you will have connected with what that meant, but we couldn't have said it just as well as they did in that particular presentation. So I can't overemphasize the importance of very strong, healthy, trusting relationships within your classroom and whatnot. And if your school policy is not supporting that, go to your senior leaders, go to the school management and say, we need to look at this because we need to be given time and space to develop good relationships with kids because I want to teach them really well. Okay, so that's a bit of a plug from me. So here's relationships in the classroom. Again, the very first box is about you as a practitioner. Do you proactively build and nurture and restore relationships with all your learners? Now, there will be some of your learners that you will find this hard. That is only human. There are some of the kids that are so hard to like, and they really make that more difficult. They'll push you away and it's test your boundaries. But it's really important that those are the kids that you want to capture even more because they will be the most distant from learning. The next thing is sometimes you can't really reason with the youngster because you haven't got that relationship there to start off with. If you think of a secondary practitioner, it could be October before you really start to build relationships with kids because you only maybe see them once or twice a week and they're new to you and you've got 33 in your class. So you haven't really got to know them yet, but what you can be doing all of the time is modeling your behaviour that you want to see from your learners. So that relationship-based behaviour. Teaching learners explicitly about healthy relationships and emotions. And your classroom and your class activities create opportunities for learners to build and strengthen those relationships. Now, that might think, oh, but I'm a physics teacher or I'm a maths teacher. All of the time, through the conversations that you have informally with the youngsters when you're moving around to help them and support them, those impromptu conversations that come up from the learning that's happening within the classroom, all of those can be used to build relationships, to model relationship building approaches, and to repair relationships at times. So using all your opportunities to keep on reinforcing that. So that whether that's between children and staff, even talking about relationships, with family at home. Obviously, you don't want to stop cross boundaries. Now here, I've tried to look outside of just education, and this is some healthy relationship top tips from our colleagues in public health. And they're just very simple. They're things that we can all do. They do not require additional resources, but it's things like the warm welcome, getting to know the youngsters as individuals, showing them what kindness looks like. So not being unkind in our language that we use towards others, but actually going the other way. Letting them know when they're doing things well. I wouldn't reinforce poor behaviour or be tokenistic about that. But if they are getting something well, even if it's a social skill that they've joined into an activity, even if they're not getting, that's what you praise. Being consistent so that you're the predictable thing, that they can absolutely trust how you're going to behave. So not being nice one day and not the next. Having said that, we're all individuals and we have bad days, but when we let the kids know that we're having a bad day, and they will understand that. Think before we respond. Taking that few moments to reframe, take a deep breath. You heard that practitioner say in the last thing. Trying to be respectful of rights all of the time. So whether that's privacy, something you know about the youngster, but you don't mention it in class, even though you think it's driving their behaviour. Giving them time and space if they need it, and making sure that they know where they can go to for help. That might be you, or making sure that after the class they can go to somebody, or at break time or after school. They know if you think they're struggling, they know who they can go to or where they can go to. And trying to do a wee check-in with every child every day. That validates their experience within your classroom. So there's just a few things. If you're demonstrating relational practice, you will be showing unconditional positive regard. I'm never too sure, that's a horrible way to say it, but if it means you give children a chance every day. Yesterday was maybe a bad day, but today's a new day. Okay, they can start again. Actively listening with purpose, listening for meaning, and not listening to reply. So that's trying to see that communication through the behaviour, really, really listening to what they're saying and what's implied behind understanding what they're saying. Always viewing behaviour through that nurturing trauma-informed lens. That depending on what you read, whether you connect before you correct, whether you use Bruce Perry's relate before you reason, whatever, but actually using the relationship first before you go straight into the correction. And focusing on being inclusive, supporting well-being and addressing needs always helps. And helping your learners know the impact of their actions in a kind way, because they may not know. So not making that assumption, and encouraging them to be hopeful and optimistic for their future learning. So they might have had an awful day today, but tomorrow's a fresh day. Okay, or reminding them of times when they got it right in the past, so you know that they can get it right in the future. Children find it very easy to fall back into black and white thinking. It always happens this way. I'm never going to get it. But of course, you can actually break that cycle by giving them a little bit of hope. So there are resources out there. I've put some to the side, the public health resource. It's all about relationships. There's some lovely videos and things like that in there. We've got the Compassionate Connected Classroom resource, which is really appropriate for upper primary, but would also be appropriate for transition from primary to S1 sort of work. And these other resources that you'll see to the side are resources I'm developing just at the moment. They're not public available yet, but they will be sometime soon, which should have little sort of units of work that you can access within 15 minutes about attunement, around attachment, around reframing, things that help and support building relationships. So if you've still got the Jamboard there, here's some reflection for you to have a wee think about. So how do you create opportunities? I'm a maths teacher and I have to get through a maths lesson. So you'll be the same. How do you create opportunities to get know your learners, to build and nurture trusting relationships with each of the youngsters in your class? It takes time, and it actually takes forward planning to be able to do it. So how do you go about doing that? And also, how can you integrate activities that support relationship building and social and emotional learning in your lessons? So you wouldn't do it every single lesson, you wouldn't do it every single week, but there are times that you would be able to build in group work activity and things like that. So thinking about your own context, how would you do it? Please put any of your ideas on the Jamboard or in the chat, and Kat will transfer them over. So moving on, and I'm sorry I'm asking you to multitask and it's at the end of a school day, so I'm sorry about that, but it will get a wee bit quicker and we'll maybe have time to actually look at the Jamboard at the end. So wellbeing and care in the classroom, okay? I'm going straight into what does it mean to you? So is it obvious and visible that in your classroom, wellbeing is a priority and caring is a given, that you care about the youngsters? Is that really obvious? If another practitioner walked into your classroom, would it be obvious? Okay, now it doesn't have to look the same. I'm quite fierce, so the way I sort of fiercely love the kids, but everybody will do it in a different way, but it should still be obvious regardless of how your personality presents that. Are we, again, coming back to that modelling? Are we modelling the behaviour that we want to see? So do actually we model self-care? Because we want the children to see that so they know that their well-being is important as well. Are they taught explicitly about how to be healthy and keep themselves well? We've really learned a lot about this through COVID and how important it is. And do we create safe learning spaces? And that could be a safe adult that the learners can trust and rely on. So even take us back to teacher training, that whole idea of proximity to a youngster who's highly anxious, just moving towards them and being close to them could be just enough to create that little safe space because they know that you're beside them. They can ask, is that right? Before they write it on the piece of paper. So those small gestures that you can make, this very small changes that you can make to your classroom, can make the difference between a child being able to stay in your class or wanting to leave. And I'm thinking more of the anxious youngsters, whether they're anxious because of their mental health or emotional well-being, or whether they're anxious about the learning because they feel that they're not able to do the learning. They're frightened of what's coming next. Again, I'm going to bring it back to my own context. I have had a number of youngsters who were maths phobic. At some point in their past, they had a bad experience and didn't feel that they could learn maths. And it was up to me to make them really comfortable, say, you can do this, and I'll help you with it. That little bit of support and hurdle help potentially, or just reducing those anxiety bits. Okay. So I've put down here wellbeing and care. It's all of our responsibility. So what we need to know explicitly before we actually to make changes in our practice and in our classrooms and potentially suggest changes within the school is we have to understand that wellbeing is directly linked to learning. Okay, so if a child comes in hungry, tired, cold, too hot, for some of our youngsters they've got sensory issues and they're too hot, they're probably unlikely that they're going to engage well in the learning in the classroom. So you might need to address some of that before they can engage well in the classroom. And that doesn't, you might think that this only applies to our wee ones in primary. That actually equally applies to some of our secondary youngsters who are behind in their development. So particularly the youngsters that come in after kicking the football around in the playground, and they're way too hot when they come into class straight after lunch. So doing a starting activity, doing something that gives them an easy start to the class, a soft start to the class, bring their temperature down, get them started. Things like that, just noticing that they need that little bit. Their well-being improves as you develop their sense of agency and autonomy. So anywhere you can give them choice and individualize their work will probably improve their well-being. You are supporting their emotional and mental health within the class, even by just making them feel welcome, that give them that empowerment that they can do it. That will help. That's all those things bolster that emotional well-being. And you can do that just if you have those good trust and relationships with them, and the whole class has that culture of care and kindness. Okay, so you actually use the word kindness and care in the class. That's not taboo. And promote and enhance learners' development of social and emotional skills anywhere that you can, particularly after COVID. We know some youngsters are coming into secondary school or even halfway through secondary school, and those social skills have gone backwards. Their ability to work in groups, to share, to put their hands up, have gone. And so using as many opportunities to use the language of emotions and feelings, because a lot of our youngsters just won't understand what they mean. To develop those skills. And we can be doing that all the time through modelling, but also through direct teaching, viewing the child holistically in the context of their families and the communities. So not having those expectations that maybe we were brought up with, but actually putting them in the context of where they actually live and how they live, and understanding that their own well-being, showing them that we are concerned about our own well-being. So mentioning things like, I'm sorry, I'm tired today. I was a wee bit sharp there. That's fine. That teacher on the video showed about showing their vulnerabilities, but the kids articulate with that because they know that we're not perfect. They see it, so we might as well talk about it. Hey, wellbeing care in the classroom. Well, it's all about developing that sense of belonging and safety. I like to say maths was the subject where everybody counts. That was the banner I had outside my maths classroom because I wanted them to know that kindness exists in this place. Any way that we can support that physical well-being. So whether it's with lighting, heating, proper chairs, a desk that's the right height, anything. Keeping noise levels appropriate for some of our learners with sensory issues. Modeling self-awareness and self-compassion so that they become more emotionally aware. Helping them understand their emotions. Most of our learners will be able to say angry, sad, and happy. But some of them don't have much more of a language than that. So constantly exploring, what does jealous mean? What does embarrassed mean? What does frustrated mean? And using those words and checking that they understand what they mean. Trying to notice early signs of distress. The youngster who tries to keep their coat on, puts their hood up, tries to withdraws from the conversation, these sort of things, the early signs of distress, or the other way, starts to misbehave, starts to draw attention to themselves, so they get put out of the class. Okay, encouraging learners to talk about their feelings and to listen when they do. Encourage help-seeking behaviour. So always praise them if they come and ask for help, because you want them to keep doing that. Over time, helping them. So you have to help them in the immediacy of a situation, but over time, if you realise that this is something that they regularly get frustrated, they regularly become anxious over particular activities, they can't join in with group work, they can't share or take turns. Over time, starting to develop coping strategies with that and really develop skills around that and that resilience. Even something as silly as when they don't get it all right. I had youngsters who used to not like to write anything down until they knew it was the right answer because they didn't want an X or any sort of mark in their book for correction. Giving them choice and the ability to make decisions as often as you possibly can. So whether that's just about a topic, and using praise and encouragement. Okay, just some of the ways in your classroom that you can do it. There is loads and loads and loads and loads of resources out there. I've just mentioned a few here that you can go up. It's almost overwhelming, the resources that are out there. But these are just a few that you can be using. The very bottom one, the cycle of wellbeing, is for you as a practitioner. So how do you look out for your own wellbeing? Because you need to top up your own, be self-compassionate and top yourself up in terms of emotionally as well, because you have to look after yourself if you want to look after the children. Okay. Again, if I save this as a PDF, these will be live links, so you can go directly to them and have a look. Oh, I think I might have gone on. Just gone on to one of the live links, which wasn't my intention. So, wellbeing and care, reflective questions for you in the classroom. How do you organise your classroom to best support the wellbeing of your learners? Now, that could be even the consistent routines that you use. So you know that you've got a class that's high activity levels, high energy. So do you always provide a soft starter activity that just brings those energy levels down? Simple things like that, those really consistent routines that you use. How and when do I check up on the wellbeing needs of my class and of individual learners? So do you do that as part of the starting activity, or during the non-direct teaching time and children are working on tasks, you go around and speak to them individually to just do that check-in? And do you have, this is for yourself, do you have a time or a person that you use to check in on your own wellbeing? So somebody within the staff group. Don't assume that you're always doing well. Go and ask and talk through things with others. Again, on the Jamboard, I've put down those first 2 questions on the Jamboard for ideas that you can be thinking about. How do you do your check-ins? Because you might have really innovative ideas, like using circles, using one session a week that you actually do a check-in around well-being. And other people will benefit from seeing your ideas. So please, please, please put them on the Jamboard. Okay. And that brings us to the very end. And this is the quickest one, because you will see how realizing rights and getting the youngster to participate in every aspect of your class. Okay. From the expectations around behavior to the learning that's happening and how it's taught, the relationships that you build and how you look out for the well-being of your youngsters so that they're able to learn feeds into this one. So this is the quickest one for us to do. So don't worry, we'll not be running on for too much more time. But this is about really good inclusive practice and about the universal support that you have in your class. Now, it's really worth your while spend a lot of time thinking about universal support because it makes your job easier. If you can use one level of support, like for example, large font for children who have visual impairment or their eyesight's not so great in the class, if you can use that for all your youngsters, that will actually fix a need for maybe 3 or 4 youngsters who were there going unidentified that they really do need glasses. Say, for example, if you know that you've got 3 or 4 youngsters in your class with poor working memory, so you always have a prompt. Once you move into a task or activity, you always have the prompts on the blackboard because you don't assume that they'll remember the steps in the task. You will be fulfilling the need for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 youngsters in your classroom at a universal level, which takes a lot of time and effort for you to answering those 4 or 5 different children to respond, leaving you time to really target into the support for a few youngsters that you can't do at a universal level. You need to go and provide it to them individually. So that's my first thing around your practice. It's about, do you address support needs as far as possible at that universal level, that whole class level? Okay. The next thing is, how do you ensure support and resources are available and accessible? Because you might be a practitioner who has to move around several classrooms. You're not always in the same place. So if you know that a particular class are going to need overlays, are going to need mechanical supports, are going to need number squares, say for example, because their addition or multiplication is not good, how do you make sure that they're always available so that you can provide that universal support and then be able to concentrate on the slightly more targeted support that's needed? Are you able to let the learners lead their own learning to an extent? Okay, because that's how you empower them to be leaders of learning. That's how they become successful learners for life. And then, are your classroom and class activities inclusive? Okay, so you're always taking account of that youngster who really struggles to join into group work activities, or they have literacy issues, so they get withdrawn and don't get to join into the full group activity because they have literacy issues. How can you overcome that? Maybe immersive reader, etc. So how can you make your classroom more inclusive? It could even be something like the posters that you have on the wall are the thing that are the prompts or the extra resources. But there's lots of different ways and contexts, and I could go on and on and on. So I'm just going to come to the very basic principles of inclusion, because if you're not completely sure what I mean, there's 4 basic principles of inclusion. Are the children in your class? Are they present? Okay, so minimise and withdrawal as much as possible, give them the support within the classroom so they feel like they belong. You see where we're linking in with the other themes? Okay, it's non-stigmatizing because it's offered at a universal level. As soon as a child starts to get that more intensive targeted support and they get withdrawn, a lot of children don't engage with that support, even though it's brilliant and supportive and all that sort of thing, but because they feel different. So as much as possible, if you can provide it in your classroom, they're more likely to engage with it. And that brings us on to the present, the participating. Are they participating both in learning, but also participating in things like decision making for the class on the topic that's been, how it's taught? Are they participating in that? And where you have to look out for here is you will have a cohort of maybe the main part of your class who will participate. What about the ones who consistently don't? How do you draw them in? And that's why I mentioned circles earlier, because if you're in a circle, it almost, just by the nature of it being a circle, and if you go around the circle, and you can put the youngsters who don't normally participate at the beginning of the circle. So they really almost have to. You might need to give a bit of hurdle help, but participate. Okay. Are they supported? Whether that's practical supports.
I'm not sure if it's me or if it's Janine that we've lost.
It's Janine.
Oh, I'm sure she will try to come back in.
One that doesn't always come to people's mind is about, is the curriculum appropriate?
We lost
And
you
Kat,
there, Janine.
I can see you're speaking. Are you speaking to me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'll type in the chat.
I'm going to type it in the chat. So the curriculum, does it meet the needs of all your learners? And is it engaging all of your learners? Practical support. Can you hear me again now? Yep, okay. So literally, this is those are the pillars of inclusion. If you're thinking around the sort of present, participating, support that's needed, and if all those are happening, there should be
Right, I think we have completely lost Janine. I am sure she will come back. Oh, here she comes.
Very sorry, Kat, I just got kicked out.
That's all right, don't worry.
I shall just go straight back onto the presentation. Hopefully that's us now. So, so the next line is about the things that you will probably really do naturally, and you're doing it all the time, that range of pedagogical approaches, the right resources and differentiation within your classroom. But I want you to really, really think about, is the curriculum that I'm using engaging and appropriate for all my learners? All right. And I'm particularly thinking primary practitioners, you will do this quite well. anyway, because you'll do group work, you'll have different children working on different things. We're not so great at doing this in secondary level, and particularly as we move up into the senior phase, we may have youngsters who are working at National 3 level, but we are a National 4-5 class that we're delivering. How do we make sure that we are still providing an appropriate curriculum for those youngsters who are working at a lower level, or alternatively at a higher level? So that would be something that you may be able to accommodate within your own classroom practice, but you may actually need to go to a departmental meeting to discuss potentially how you do it at a department level, okay, or a year group level. So it might be beyond yours, but definitely be thinking about it. Okay, again, to be inclusive, you need to be respecting differences, proactively addressing equality and equity issues. And these are things that we sometimes don't think about, but gender stereotyping and unconscious bias that we may have within our classrooms. So assumptions about families and children, and potentially that coming through in our teaching. So I know whenever I went through some training, I realized how much in a maths classroom I sold some of the ways I was teaching to boys using football analogies and these sort of things, not realize I was reinforcing gender stereotypes and not breaking that down. So it made me have totally rethink about the examples that I was using in terms of measure and things like that. So it's worth your while having a wee look at your resources and potentially some of the examples that you've been using for years. Just checking, is there unconscious bias there? Is there gender stereotyping? And proactively addressing anything that might possibly be an equality issue. So not just not doing it, but proactively looking at, say, for example, racial literacy and things like that. And of course, that all means about being really good about assessing and addressing additional support needs within your classroom. So again, there are loads and loads and loads of resources out there, and this is me coming pretty much to a close, and we'll maybe have a chance for a bit of a discussion around this. But that's from a professional learning for you to look at inclusive practice, but resources like, for example, the Circle resource. Now, you don't have to use the Circle resource itself, but it might give you a lead into resources that you might develop for yourself. So it's looking for barriers to learning within your own classroom at a whole class level. So at some point, yes?
Can I do another plug?
Yes, go for
it. We have a training session coming up in the Circle resource. Honestly, and we didn't plan this, I promise you. What we've done is Pauline Lynch from Education Scotland, who was an educational psychologist, is going to be leading 4 sessions for primary and 4 sessions for secondary. Now, the only thing that I am going to say is they are happening during the school day, but they're 4 sessions that you would have to turn up to, and I will put the links into the chat for that. So you do need to have the backing for from your head teacher to do that. The reason that it is running through the school day is so that we know that it should be something that would link with what's on your in-school improvement plan. And it is a considerable amount of time. You're looking at, I think it's about a 2-hour session, or a 1.5-hour session. So we want to try and give you the opportunity to do that. That's not in your own time. Janine, pass back to you.
No problem. And thank you for offering these because Circle resource gives you a new way of looking at whole class approaches that are really, really inclusive. So breaking down barriers to learning. They might be social barriers to learning because you've got a class that just don't work well together. They could be around learning, etc. And it gets you to look at that in a systematic way, look at your own classroom, even the physical environment, to sort of break down what can I do at a whole class level to make my teaching easier for the whole class so that I can concentrate on those youngsters who need a bit more. And so it's absolutely excellent. But even if you don't use the Circle resources, it gives you a guide as to how do I look at all my kids, break down the needs of all my kids, and what's the predominant needs across my class, and how can I address those at a universal level, taking the heat off yourself and making teaching easier at a whole class level. So it's really worth your while having a wee look into Circle or going to the training. I've put up there all the dyslexia because the dyslexia, those resources were a vehicle for getting the inclusive practice learning out there. And of course, many of the things that affect our youngster, like for example, poor working memory, it's very, very common amongst youngsters that we think have dyslexia. So don't look past those resources, because it will help you with some of your youngsters who have FASD, who have poor working memory, but don't necessarily have dyslexia. There will be nuggets of learning in there that will help you in your practice at a whole class level. Okay, and some of the others are for specifically around certain sort of like inclusion type issues that you can actually have a little look at. And I've put in there about promoting attendance, because the children can't learn if they're not in your classroom. So a few reflection questions around that. Okay. So that brings us to the questions on the Jamboard, and I see people have been busy putting things onto the Jamboard, which is lovely. But the first thing is, do you have an overview of all the needs of your class? So you're looking at your class collectively. We're very good sometimes if we really don't know how to get through or teach a particular youngster, and we're looking at the profile that's been written up by the Support for Learning department, or that's come through from a primary school, or another class teacher has passed on to you in the primary school. But have you looked at your whole class? Because there could be a couple of youngsters who actually aren't identified as having additional support needs, who aren't engaging in learning, and you'd need to put that overview of how to actually support all of these youngsters in terms of that universal support. Because that leads on to the next question: is there universal supports that you can put in place to meet the needs of several learners at once, so that you can actually concentrate on the others? And then how do you best plan for those learners who need that little bit more targeted support? If you know all of the above, that makes that so much easier. So I'd be really grateful if you use the Jamboard to give us your ideas about this, because I know very often this is a personalised thing that some of you will have developed over years of experience. You've got your own methods, and there could be some of those little methods that the rest of us can use. So if you can put them into the Jamboard, that would be really, really useful. Well, that brings me basically to the end of the presentation, and it does leave us a little time, and I am going to probably go to the Jamboard to have a look at some of your ideas. So these were the reflective questions that I left you with, and I hope you go away and start to think about them a little bit more, because remembering where we started this was, how do we meet the recommendations that Angela Morgan suggested around our implementing the Additional Support for Learning Act? So in other words, meeting the needs of our learners who require additional support. How do we meet the needs of the promises that we've made to our care experienced youngsters, and how do we recognise children's rights? I started off with saying, if you do work in these 4 thematic areas, you will be meeting all of those recommendations, those promises, and realising those rights. So it's really worth your while going away and continuing to think about this. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to show people the Jamboard that you have been coming up with. And I'm sorry it hasn't been more interactive, but with only an hour and a half, we're trying to squeeze in probably a couple of sessions worth of learning into this, but I think you've all done marvellously. So rights and participation, about the classroom environment and ethos and making it more right-respecting. I love this, giving pupils a choice of notes, texts, novels, and things like that. Maybe an elective 1 period a week. I know very often that happens in PE and things like that, where the youngsters are able to, so many of their lessons are actually prescriptive around the curriculum that's set for them, but they can choose around 1 period a week, or potentially an interest area for a topic. Pretty good. Pupil involvement in school improvement plan policies. That is very much where the young leaders of learning would lead you to. So children not just having a say of what they learn in the classroom, but also about school improvement planning. So if you are interested in joining that young leaders of learning, that will take you in that direction. Linking to rights through the books that you're using and things like that. And thinking right at the beginning, thinking about equality and inclusivity when you're planning. I love that. Right in the middle, listen and act upon it. Absolutely. And getting people's feedback. So ways that you can start to increase rights and participation within your own classes. Under relationships, you said having a laugh. Okay, so absolutely. If children enjoy your class, they are far more likely to learn. Okay, you don't want it to get out of hand, but you do want them to enjoy. Any activities that children can practically get involved in, absolutely. Opportunities to work with their peers and support each other and to showcase their strengths. And that is where when you start to think about circle and inclusive practice, you have to then say, well, what youngsters actually don't work well together, and how do we support them to continue to do that in class? Because a lot of them would like to work with their peers, but just actually don't do it very well. So they need support with that relationship building. Yes, on the other side of it is let them know that you're human, be flexible, of course with limitations. Yes, because these are children and they are your responsibility within your classroom. So ultimately the limitations will be your responsibility. Not embarrassing them, singling them out, building up that trust, absolutely. Making them want to come to your class. So yes, leaving them with a cliffhanger at the end of a class to say what they're going to be doing next week. It always gets them wanting to come to see, oh, we're going to be doing that, or they know what's coming next. I don't know what NCC. I use some of my NCCT, oh, this is your class contract time or non-class contact time, to do one-to-ones and small group activities. Whoever did that, that's above and beyond. But absolutely, if you can do that, but it wouldn't be expectation of everybody, because that's your preparation and planning time and setting expectations. Okay, brilliant, good points. Wellbeing and care, soft starts, breakout times, and offer supportive get outs for those who need it. Yes, I know if you've got a 15-year-old boy who gets up to leave your class and you can see the reason is that they're about to burst into tears, you give them that exit strategy, because if you try to prevent them from doing that, it's all going to go horribly wrong. And that's about you knowing your young people, and they will massively appreciate that if you give them a legitimate reason, a legitimate exit strategy to avoid them being embarrassed. And that's about you being emotionally available to your youngsters and being attuned to their needs. And I'm just going to see, lastly, inclusion and universal support. Yes, so things that you can do easily, which just makes your whole life easier. Have available your visual aids, your visual timetable, your communication cards for the youngsters that need. And remember, you don't have to recreate these every single year, especially if you keep them good and laminate them. Is usually pretty good. Absolutely, that communication with parents to support what you're doing in the classroom, then mirroring that at home absolutely reinforces the learning and can take it that little bit further for youngsters who really struggle to pick things up. The parents can be helping with that at home. And then the other side, the targeted support, using iPads, camera over text. Yes, I recently saw a fantastic inclusive practice in a school where a girl was severely visually impaired, and there was no difference made to her in any of her classes, and it was just natural that she came in and took a photograph and blew everything up. And all the other youngsters now this is a school where they don't allow mobile phones in classrooms, but every youngster respected that this girl was visually impaired, but joining into every class, and they absolutely knew that she was allowed to do that. There was no hassle with that at all. Absolutely involving parents and partners in planning. for supports. And yes, predictive text gives a hint for those who are looking for it, and keyboard and mic headset to allow for text to speech functions, and sometimes special keyboards for youngsters who don't know their capitals and things like that, and involving them in planning to tell where they meet success and what they find difficult and what will help them, because we do make an awful lot of assumptions for youngsters that we know what will help them, but in actual fact they could turn around and say, see if I just sit closer to the board, or if I sit away from the door, then I don't get distracted by the noise. They come up with the most unusual things, but it's what they know would help them. So that's where they are the experts in their own learning, and we don't have to be. Again, it makes our lives easier as teachers if we ask them. And that brings us back to participation and children's rights. So that's me for today. I know there's very, very few minutes left, but I'm happy to answer any questions or leave you to work on the Jamboard or just go on your merry way because we're all coming up to Christmas. Kat.
Thanks very much, Janine. That was a really, really good session and really informative as always.